shades of night are falling. It's twilight time. Out of the mist your voice is calling. 'Tis twilight time. When purple-colored curtains mark the end of day, I'll hear you, my dear, at twilight time.
Well, welcome back for Lesson 5. This is Gayle with BERNINA of Naperville, and Lesson 5 is our Twilight Garden Lesson 5, of course. And we're going to do some couching. We're going to use the circular embroidery attachment, and we're going to make a fun little, I call this a thread catcher. I think when I made it, let's open it up here, that it sort of looked like a dream catcher. And it got me thinking that, you know, when you're trimming the backside of your quilts and you've got all these little snippy things, well, this is lined with batting, and it's going to catch all of our little trimmies as we get going on our Twilight Garden and the assembly and all of that stuff later on. So enough talking. Let's get over to our presentation deck and let's see what we're in for this month. I'm going to give you the grand tour. Well, here we are, Lesson 5, and it's all about couching and using the circular embroidery attachment. So what can you expect from Lesson 5? Well, when you watch the BERNINA Skill Hub content, I recommend you watch it first, and you're going to be performing couching with the number 22 3-groove couching foot and the number 21 braiding foot. Jamie's going to show you all the steps to use those and how to stitch them out with the stitches that she's chosen. She's also going to show couching with the BERNINA number 83 circular embroidery attachment. And that she's calling that a bonus lesson, but really it is part of the quilt. It's just that when we get into the embroidery part, you're going to notice that there's also another block that looks very similar, but that block is being stitched out with the stitch designer that is in the embroidery side of your BERNINA 990. So what are we going to do at BERNINA of Naperville? Well, I have some alternative feet and techniques for couching to show you because it just happens sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, but the number 22 3-groove couching foot is on back order right now. We do not have a single one other than the 22 I've had for over 30 years. So we just don't have that to sell to you. Some of you might have already purchased it, and that's fine. If you haven't, please don't fret. There's so many other things that you can use, and I'm going to take you through those. I'm also explaining most, if not all, of the other BERNINA couching feet because maybe you want to try a new technique. We have tons of tutorials that I have packed into this presentation deck to show you how to use those, but I'll just scratch the surface a little bit in this lesson to kind of just show you what you might want to pay more attention to, okay? So lesson 5 on the BERNINA Skill Hub is broken down into 2 lessons. Part 1, couching. Part 2, circular embroidery attachment with some couching using the number 21 foot. So here are the blocks for the large quilt. So the embellished block is block number 1, but there's also a block just like this one for 15 and 45. And you can see here in my little pictures from the original one, this is not the one BERNINA made. This is the BERNINA International one. So there is no embellishment on this. It's simply quilted. If you wanted, you could embellish all of these blocks, but the instructions only have us embellishing block number 1. Also, block number 26 is a 4-patch as well, only these circles are what you're going to be doing with couching using your BERNINA circular embroidery attachment in that number 21 foot. So that's what BERNINA is showing you. Now, for the small quilt, you really only have 1 block. And I am recommending that you make both of your blocks here as 1. So you do your grid couching, and then you do your circular embroidery couching. And so you can do all of the techniques, but it's going to be just for block 15 because that's the only one of these blocks that's in the small size. So we talked about the supplies, but there's the 21 braiding foot. There's a similar one, which is the 12C. We're going to get to that in a moment. There's our 22 3-groove couching foot.
but then there's also the 25, which is a nice alternative if you don't have the 22. Then I have some other alternatives that I'm going to show you. Last month, I showed you the 8-weight razzle that we used in our pin tucks to make the corded pin tucks. Well, this time we're going to use it for couching. If you're using the 25 5-groove couching foot, you can also use the razzle or the dazzle, but some of you might have an easier time with a little bit thinner thread, which is the glamour, spaghetti, fruity, and those types of 12-weight threads. You even have a 12-weight thread in your thread box, and that is the Aurifil variegated. So feel free to bust that out as well. Also, the number 83 circular embroidery attachment that you see here is something we'll be using. This is the month, if you've never thought about it before, that you should get the Big Book of Feet, because I am going to be talking about all sorts of feet. We're going to need the 80 microtex needles for piecing and the 90 top stitch needles for doing our decorative stitching. And then, as always, I am going to give you an additional lesson. And so we're going to make this little thread catcher that we're going to make, using our circular embroidery attachment and some of the techniques that we've learned for this lesson. And for that reason, you're going to need some interfacing. I'm just using OESD's fusible woven. You're going to need a 9.5-inch batting scrap that eventually is going to become a circle. And then I have a ton of Sally Tomato zipper tapes by the yard. So you're going to need 24 inches of that with one zipper head. So now let's get serious here and talk about couching. There's more than one kind of couch potato, guys, and you are going to be a couching potato because you're going to be sitting at your machine having so much fun doing this technique. If you are unfamiliar, couching is the process of sewing down thread, or you might even say appliquing thread. It's usually thread that will not fit through a needle. And the thread can be couched in straight lines to form a grid. It can complement decorative stitches and so much more, right? Couching can even be used to create thread-filled objects with thread painting and mock machine embroidery crochet. Now, we're not going to get that fancy. This time, we're simply going to sew pretty much the threads down in a grid or with our circular embroidery attachment. So here's some samples of some couching from We All Sew. The pillow here, this was couching where they've used the heavy thread to fill the areas so it looks like machine embroidery. The stocking is actually like a pieced stocking, and the seams have been enhanced with couched yarn to create this cozy texture on this stocking. Then, if you look in the picture up above here, you can even see that this little furry blue yarn has been couched, the little slubby yarn, and then this razzly-dazzly looking thread there. So all examples of couching. I also have some examples that, let's have a look over at the design board and I'll show them to you. Okay, well, some of the stuff I'm showing to you may seem a little redundant, but repetition is a good thing and it sticks, right? So, this is a project that we did on our YouTube channel. I think this was a Fat Quarter Club project, and this is a doorstop. This is about a 5-pound doorstop. I use it to prop the door open going from the garage into the mudroom when we were carrying groceries or whatever. So the houses are appliqued using the 25 couching foot. We'll get there in a minute. And you can see that these are about 5 strands of razzle or dazzle thread. And that's what it looks like when there's thread in all 5 grooves of that foot. So that was really fun, super easy, didn't take a lot of work, right? Then we've got this. This was done with the number 22 3-groove foot. Now, unfortunately, that is the one that's on back order from Bernina, but this was couched on water-soluble stabilizer, and I made this grid. Now, this would have been good for, like a little scarf or something, and this is yarn. This isn't thread. This is alpaca or llama fiber, I think, but I wanted to play around with it, and I don't always have time to knit all of my gorgeous yarns into something. So that's something that we did. Then there's also free motion couching that you can see on this block that's in this little loop-de-loop shape here. That's done with the number 43 foot. And then our little faux entre-deux. I'm going to show you some tips about that. I also have a video on it. But this is an heirloom technique entre-deux where it's like this trim and it's insertion trim. So it's meant to go in between two different pieces of fabric. Now, typically, it would all be one color, like you see on this shirt here, and it kind of gives just the look that you've done some special needlework or whatever. But that is also technically couching. Then we get into more bulky type of couching. And this was really chunky yarn. So this is done with the 59C or the 60C. This was a Footloose Friday. I'm including these videos for you in your presentation deck, so don't worry if you want to see more details on these. And then this is one of my favorites. So I use this gridded pattern of the fabric. This has been stabilized with a cutaway stabilizer that's meant to be left in here. And then this is worsted weight yarn in a like a green, sagey green color. And I just did a satin stitch to cover all of that yarn, and it created this little dimensional look. Then I used a skinnier yarn, like more of a fingering weight yarn, and a sagey mint green color to cover that. And I got this nice plaid look. This is going to be a pillow eventually, I swear. Now, when you're picking your thread for couching, those of you who are knitters or crocheters may have a stash of yarns that inspire you already, right? But if you're a cross stitcher, you may have some DMC cotton floss or pearl rayon or other kind of needlepoint or craft yarns. Those are fine too. Now, I'm choosing to try to keep my Twilight Garden quilts, I'm making three of them. Amy's making one. I want to keep everything clean and simple. And I'm just making the decision to avoid the slubby, eyelash-like and bulky fibers like you see down below here. I'm going to try to stick to the smoother type of threads that you see over here on the right. But you know what? This is your quilt that you're making, and you can do whatever you want. I really want you to find the joy in this project and, just kind of look around at a yarn store in a little bit of a different way, right? Now, if you just have no place that you know of to buy this stuff, right? Well, you can search our 12 weight threads and our 8 weight threads at BERNINAofNaperville.com, and you'll see that we have quite a selection. And Eleganza is an 8 weight cotton, and it comes in solid and it comes in variegated. And look at this wonderful one. This could go really nicely with our coastal vibes there. So that's Eleganza. Then we have Razzle. This is what I showed you last month. And that's 8 weight as well, but it's rayon. Dazzle is just like Razzle, only Dazzle has some metallic to it. This one would look great with our Botanic Earth, and see the little flecks of metallic in that one. Now, if you don't want the thread as thick as this, there's 12 weight, and we have the 12 weight Aurifil, which is cotton. And we have it in every color possible. There's a lovely purple one that can go with your Twilight Garden Magical Twilight colorway. And then there's also 12 weight Glamour. And this is a Wonderfill thread, and we have it, a little box of it in a variety of colors, 2 different colorways, and then we have it by the spool. And it's really similar to Razzle. It's just 12 weight rayon with the metallic fed through there. So we have some options for you. Hopefully one of these will suffice, right? And now, dun da da dun da da da, let's cover the feet for couching. So like I said, if you're knitters or crocheters, you may have a stash of thread. And to go along with all of your thread, I am sure Bernina makes a couching foot that will be perfect, whether it's bulky yarn, it's thin thread, it's metallic, or whatever. So we're going to start easy. So couching feet thus far made by Bernina, because you know they come out with feet all the time. But right now, let's start with one that comes with your machine, and that's the number 3C. This is actually a manual buttonhole foot, but it can be used for couching since the two channels under the foot create nice little notches to glide over certain gauges of thread. And I particularly like this technique for mock entre deux. And I even included a video right here that you can watch to see me do this. So there's also number 6, number 39, or number 39C. 6 is metal, and the 39 versions, either regular or C, are clear. And these feet are designed to go over heavy satin or decorative stitches, and there's a hole through the foot in front of the needle for threading the 12 weight thread. So I made a video on this because I like to use this to actually cord my scallop stitches. And right here in this tutorial, you can see those corded stitches. That has a black razzle in it. And I've adjusted my scallop stitch, and I'm using the 39C, and I use the 5.5 millimeter needle plate for this. But this will tell you all you need to know about doing this technique. So make sure you click this link so you can see how cool this particular technique is. Now, there are more couching feet. There is the 11 cordonnet foot. Now, this is great for sewing over cording for a sashiko look or for sewing over wire in like fiber crafts. So I did this to create a little edge around leaves in this tutorial. And so I'm using that number 11 foot and the little groove underneath to hold my wire in place perfectly to go along the edges of these leaves. And this is really fun because I added these leaves to the bottom of a little beehive pincushion, and I was able to really simulate like how the leaves curl around and things like that. Now, there are a couple of bulky overlock feet, the 12, the 12C. The 12 is a maximum of 5.5 millimeter stitch capability, and it will glide over yarns that are just slightly less than a quarter of an inch. This is made for piping and other things as well. The number 12C is going to be able to go up to fibers that are just a little over a quarter of an inch. And because this machine allows you to do 9 millimeters wide. This foot also has a hole in the middle that can accommodate feeding heavier threads and yarns through that hole. Now, there's another version of this. It's called the number 21. And the number 21 is very similar to the 12C, except it's made for 5.5 millimeter machines. And you would feed the thread through the hole in the 21, like Jamie shows you in the Skill Hub videos. And so this one I use for my razzle, but I used 4 strands of the razzle because I can get a lot more thickness through the hole of that piece. All right. So now on with the star of the show. So what you're seeing in this picture here is the 22 3 groove foot versus the 25 5 groove foot. And what I have loaded up with my 25 is actually razzle and dazzle right there. It fits very nicely when you comb them like that. In the 22 foot, I have 3 strands of La Espiga thread. Now, La Espiga, they don't gauge their thread the same as some of our other threads, but I would imagine that it is about a 3 weight. And you know that with thread, the lower the number, the thicker the thread. And so it can do 3 strands of La Espiga thread through the foot. Now, I featured these feet in 2 tutorials. Our Footloose Friday, where I made a I couched on water soluble, and then I washed that product after, and I got like a little mesh, right? And that was really fun, and there's lots of options. And I use yarn sometimes to do this. I have another example where I just used a alpaca wool or fiber to couch over, and this is really soft. And this would have made a lot, if I would have kept on with this, it would have made a really wonderful, wonderful scarf or something like that. Then I also use the 25 to do applique with this couching foot and a decorative stitch. And in this case, I appliqued around the little shapes of houses and made a doorstop. You could also use pin tucking feet for couching. And there's also the number 43 free motion couching foot. It's amazing. It works with that La Espiga thread, and it is, we've done numerous tutorials using the number 43 free motion couching foot. I also want to pull your attention to, we do have an older video on doing couching. You can click on it here, and I kind of touch on a lot of these feet that I've already talked about. So if you can deal with my lack of a nice tripod and things like that, you might find it valuable. It has had a lot of views through the years. Okay, so there's also number 59 C and number 60C, and they are double cording feet. So you can almost couch two yarns at the same time. And as you can see here in this photo, I'm going over pretty bulky knit yarn or yarn made for knitting, right? And so these allow for couching all sorts of bulky things, doing double piping for upholstery. You can use these to do rope bowls, all sorts of things. So I have stamped or linked a tutorial here where I make like this little pennant, but really it's a total fiber embellishment, collagey thread kind of pennant. And so you might find that one to be interesting as well. So enough about all of the couching feet. The circular embroidery attachment is equally as cool, and you can use any decorative stitch methods from lesson 1 through 5 with this attachment. Just note that some larger sideways motion stitches are not suitable for this. But what does this 83 circular embroidery attachment do? Well, essentially, it's like putting a little compass on your machine. You've got this little pokey thing that's really sharp that you put the center of your circle on, and you measure out the radius. And then as you stitch, your machine is going along straight, but the little pivot point is allowing you to sew in a circle. And you can adjust this anywhere from 1.5 to 10 inches. And you do that by sliding the little black tab on the circular embroidery attachment. And of course, the radius is half of the size of the circle. So if you want to make a 5-inch circle, you are adjusting the radius at 2.5, right? This comes with 2 screws, a screwdriver, the rubber protector to protect you from that little pivot point, and the attachment itself. And we have 4 really fun tutorials that we've done with this. One is this tiny little hat box purse that was done out of the Kaffe fabrics and some Kaffe stitches when those machines came out. We also did this to make circle applique. This is my Morse code quilt that I did the applique perfect circles. We have a pie piece table runner that we made. And what's really fun about this one is I use a double needle and a satin stitch to create the pie crust. So that might be something that you want to check out. And the most popular one that we've done with the circular embroidery attachment are my coasters that I really had so much fun with this project. I even did misquoted lyrics on one of them. And then I made this like little piece to hold them that looks like a turntable. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. I have it at home now because I love it so much. So let's have a look at what we're making. So as you know, I've told you this before, I think, that Amy does the Strawberry Kisses colorway, which is what we're looking at now. And she follows the directions to a T. So when we're looking at her blocks, we are looking at the stitches that Jamie showed you. We are looking at the stitches that Jamie showed you for the couching straight line as well. So the only thing that is a little bit different, and I did mine slightly differently, and we'll talk about that, is she couched right down the middle using this stitch, whereas I used this stitch down the middle here and put the cords on either side. It doesn't matter. This is her quilt. This is your quilt. You can do whatever you would like. Another thing that was a little bit of a challenge for her is that we are out of 22 feet. The number 22, three grooved couching foot. We're going to talk about that in a moment. So she used a thinner thread. She used the Glamour, and she used the five groove number 25, which is totally fine too. But we're gonna talk about that, so don't worry. But nonetheless, so the cool thing about this is that she used the number 21 foot here and some yarn that she had from her stash. She loves these vibrant fluorescent colors. And that came out really good. So the cool thing is, and we'll talk about this, is that whatever we have done as far as decorative stitching through these 5 lessons, we can do with the circular embroidery attachment. It's just instead of sewing straight lines, it's going to sew it in a circle. So this is Strawberry Kisses. So here's the Magical Twilight colorway, and I, picked some different stitches here. I used some different threads, and I happen to have a 22 three groove couching foot in my stash because, I've got all the feet. I've been doing this forever. And this one here is that entre deux stitch. We're going to talk about that and what I do with that in a different way. But yeah, you can see how mine came out here. Nothing fantastical here. I used the same stitches Jamie recommends. I did deviate a little bit on this one. And one of the things that I did here, in addition to couching, and I couched over 4 strands with my number 21 foot, I couched over 4 strands of razzle that made this a little bit thicker. And then I love the triple straight stitch with the lighter thread just to kind of make things pop. And, because this is our magical Twilight colorway, I put some little stars in there just for fun. All right, so Coastal Vibes. Here it is. I really like this one a lot. I particularly like the grid that was created in this one. I used the same stitch in the middle here that Jamie used, but I deviated here with a different stitch just for fun. And so what I want you to know is in the presentation deck for this class, I break down, I show you a picture of what I do, and then I list all of the stitches that I'm using in case you want to do it just like me. So don't worry, I'm not going to spend your time on this video telling you all the colors and everything. You're just going to reference your presentation deck that I send you each month. Okay, so then now when we go to our circular embroidery attachment on this one, I used a satin stitch. I used my tassel um, folder, and I did these cute little tassel stitches like this. This was super fun. And I did these tassels in a very early decorative stitch clinic video. All it is you stitch the tassel stitch, then when you're done, you turn the work over and you cut your bobbin thread, and then you use a little stiletto to pull the little tassels up, and there you have your tassels. So that was a lot of fun. And and yeah, I mean, like I'm happy with that. I used some triple straight stitch to, give it some dimension, and there we have that. So now here is our Botanic Earth colorway. And on this one, by the time I got to this one was the last one I did. I was over it. But I wanted to make the designs on this one just a little blendier. And I want to talk about this one in depth in a moment because I have a little tip for you if you feel like your circular embroidery attachment is getting the wigglies. And that's kind of what happened to me on this one. And I fixed it on this one, but I'm not ripping it out. I mean, like, honestly, once this whole quilt is together, if somebody notices this, then I'll give them a quarter for their keen observation skills. Okay, so that was our circular embroidery part. And then with this one, I just experimented with some different stitches. This is something out of our quilting section. And in this case, I used 3 strands of the razzle. So I didn't have a missing stitch or missing cord down the middle. I just used all 3. And then in this one, I used 1 strand down the middle and a little bit smaller stitch that I believe is found in the Heirloom folder. Okay, let's talk about when things go higgledy-piggledy like you see here. So what happened is my stabilizer that I use, because I am not a fan of stable stick, it's hard for me to peel it away and I just don't like to use it. So what I did is I used Ultra Clean and Tear. And the Ultra Clean and Tear, as you might have noticed, is kind of not as dense. It's not as stiff of a stabilizer as our stable stick and things like that, right? Stable stick holds on to the fabric, both, like on the back, so that as you're twisting it around the point of that circular embroidery attachment, that pivot point stays exactly in the right spot. Well, in the case of this guy, the pivot point was wiggling around because I had just Ultra Clean and Tear as my stabilizer. I had no backing on the backside of this thistle fabric, nor on the backside of my creme de la creme. And so it got kind of off here because I might have also been tugging at it or leaning on it or whatever the case is, right? So when I did this one, I put my 2 layers of Ultra Clean and Tear, but I added an additional small little square piece of stable stick tearaway under the creme de la creme to stabilize that point. So this way I only had a small amount of stable stick to remove and not a whole piece. So that was my piece of stable stick there. And you can also see that this is about the same amount of level that I'm ripping my stabilizer. Let's look at a piece where there's more contrast. So I leave my Ultra Clean and Tear under this. I'm not going to bother peeling this behind all of these decorative stitches and everything. And I do want a little cuddly quilt for all of my examples. So I am removing the stabilizer from these pieces, but I'm not going over the top with it, let's just say. Okay, so this is just a little practice piece that I want to show you. I am going to cut a little square of stable stick. And now I have 2 pieces that have been fused together with 505 spray and 505 spray on the top here. And this is Ultra Clean and Tear. So I'm going to take, this is my piece, I'm going to applique as a circle. And what I'm doing on both of these pieces is I'm just folding them in half vertically and horizontally so that we can find our centers. Now, this is the center here. So I'm going to score this and put this in the middle so it'll reinforce that fulcrum, right? That's on the back side of this piece. And now on the front side of the piece, I'm going to center this because I also like to take my glue stick and adhere my fabrics on top of each other like this. And this is simply, it really helps prevent slip sliding. And this is going to dry clear. You could use your 505 glue stick, which I prefer, but I'm out of them at home, so I happen to have a pack of these Elmer's glue sticks, so I'm using these here. So this is now ready to be stitched with our circular embroidery attachment.
Okay, so here's my circular embroidery attachment, and here's one of the little screws. Now you get 2 of them, but you only need one of them to attach. And I usually put mine on this way, okay? So using that hole and attaching it like this. There is another way to attach this where you can put your pivot point over here to the right, and you use that hole. Same hole, but a different hole in the circular embroidery attachment. I cannot do it this way. I'm sorry. So I put it on this way. And now we're gonna just use the special screwdriver that comes with this to attach it. There we go. And now we're gonna set our radius at 2.5 inches, which will yield us a 5-inch circle. Okay, this looks pretty good. So one thing I want to show you is this is in a notch, right? I don't have infinite adjustments here. So there's another notch, and this one looks to be at about 2 1/8. So that's my option. Or this one, which is about 2 3/8, right? If you want to tweak it more, you would work with your needle positions or something like that. But listen, it's good enough. Nobody's going to know. All right.
So I've got my 4 strands of razzle here, and I just tie them in a knot there to hold them together. And this is probably about 1.5 yards worth of a grouping. So 4 strands, 1.5 yards each, right? From your razzle, if that's what you decide to use. And I'm going to trim this. And now that knot is going to easily slip through my number 21 couching foot. So I'm going to use the number 21 and feed this through and do our couching around our piece.
So here's my piece that I tied in a knot, and I'm slipping this through my foot. And you know, this is one of those applications where we're going to rely a little bit on our tweezers to give us a helping hand here. And then I want to decide what color thread I want to use to sew this collection of other threads down. And I am just going to use a lighter color so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to remove this little protector piece that will protect us from poking ourselves. And I'm going to slide this under and put that pivot pokey thing right in our intersection, and then put the cap back on. And now it doesn't matter where we start here, right? So let's just go here, lower our foot, and now I'm picking a zigzag stitch, and I am using my zigzag stitch, the exact default stitch. So it's 3.6 millimeters wide by 1.5 millimeters long. And the idea is that when the needle swings to the right, it's going to catch all of my threads, and when it swings to the left. So I'm just going to do a little test. Oh, and this is perfect. So it's totally straddling my thread. And I'm just gently holding it. And I'm just gently holding this thread in front of the foot. Okay, so I got around, I had a little snafu. Sometimes when I'm filming these videos, you know, I'm so focused on showing you the tips that I don't watch out for my own self. I got my cording stuck, but so that was 1 inch. And so one more time, 1, 2, 3, 4, there we go. Pull our threads to the back, and now let's stitch. And I'm gonna trim my cording, like so. And then we over sew when we get to the beginning, and then I like to back stitch just a little bit and cut. Now for the rest of the stitching, it's done the same with the 20 open toe foot and everything. And you can see in this scenario, I didn't do the stitching around first and then trimming because I just wanted to show you how I use the circular embroidery attachment. And that stable stick that was back here really helped keep this nice and stiff so I could make perfect circles every time. And then, you know, once we take the stabilizer off, we can just wiggle the stitches around there, and that hole, it'll disappear. Okay, so I have another little tip about our 22 or our 25 foot. It doesn't matter, you know, think of them interchangeably really. It's just that one has 3 grooves and one has 5 grooves. So we're gonna place our thread in the little channels like so. And then we're going to stitch down the middle of the fabric. Now this is just a practice piece. I'm not following the instructions to a T here. I'm just showing you some good practices for working with these threads, especially the ones that are really slippery. Okay, so now I've got those in position and I'm ready to stitch. And now I'm holding my thumb on my threads so they don't slip out of my foot. And let's pick the entre deux stitch. That is stitch number 701. And I am going to make it just a little bit wider, about 5 millimeters, I think. There we go, perfect. And I have my needle landing in the down position now. So let's just go ahead and stitch this. And now my foot is going to hold this thread into position for me. Okay, so now when you go to stitch another row, right, I pull my threads and then we're going to hold our threads, you know, back here like this. But then you cut before the thread here at the end. This is once again preventing them from coming out. And then when I audition different threads and I play with different stitches, you know, when I do a little scrap like this, I decide, you know what, I think I want to make this stitch a little bit longer, blah, blah, blah. And once again, I hold my fingers here. When I want to end, I trim and trim our upper thread if we need, if we didn't use our cutter. And now I've got a hold of them. So now I can go up to my next row of stitching and start stitching again. And 725 is one that I like to use as well. And of course, when I'm using my 23 or my 25 feet, we have to be mindful that these feet only go to 5.5 millimeters, right? So this one I've adjusted to 5.5 by 6. So we pull, we hold our threads in front of our stitching, we trim, and that helps keep that thread always under our foot. So here's this piece. That one was cuter. That one, not so much. This one looks pretty good. I really like that stitch and everything. So now let's talk a little bit about what foot you can use if you don't have the 22 foot. So here is our 22 that you just saw me use. And you can see it's 3 little channels there. Then we have our 25 foot, which has 5 channels, and they're skinnier because it's 5 channels in the same amount of space. So with that in mind, we probably would do a few things. We have to improvise a little bit. So this thread that I used on my 22 foot, that is the razzle, and it's an 8-weight thread. Now, I have been able to use this in the past. So let me go ahead and just trim this so that we have 5 strips of this rather than 3. So we're going to grab these
slip them through our number 25 foot.
Okay, so there's our little strands of fiber distributed. I have a new piece that's been adhered to the back of my fabric. And now I'm going to line this up and put my foot down and stitch. And I'm using stitch number 422. Okay, now let's try a different stitch. I'm going to do a running zigzag, number 4. And we just want to make sure that our threads are not getting tangled, because if they get tangled, then they can get hung up in here. So you can see how I'm just combing those threads. But you can also see that this razzle goes right through the foot as well. It's not getting hung up. Everything is happy. How cute that is. There's our first stitch that we tried. That looks pretty good too. So you just have to have like some pieces like this to experiment with. So if you like that, that was, I did have to adjust the width once again because this is a 5.5 millimeter foot. So I had to adjust the stitch to actually be 5.5 millimeters, but I'm happy with both of those samples.
Okay, so I think both of these look pretty good here and here. And let's talk about another alternative to number 22. You know, 25 worked very well. Happy with that, right? But this is a 3-groove foot. And now I have a 2-groove foot. This is good news, everybody. This is the buttonhole foot number 3C that comes with your Bernina 990. Yay! It's actually a manual buttonhole foot, but it works really well for couching. And the cool thing about it is these grooves are a little bit larger, even larger than on the 22 foot, and it allows us to work with heavier thread or yarn or whatever you want to call it, right? Is it really thread? If it's really thick, I don't know. You be the judge. So I've got 2 strands here of La Espiga. This is the thread that works really well with our free motion couching foot number 43, but it also is really cool because I can line my number 3 foot up right on top of that thread and get something very, very cool. So let's take this over to the machine and stitch this out.
Now, the cool thing about this foot is I'm also going to get my full 9 millimeter wide range with this. I won't be limited to 5.5 millimeters. So we can slip this under here. And now we're going to just separate these two just a little bit, lower our presser foot down, and now let's pick a little rampart stitch of some kind. So I'm going to pick stitch number 13. And we're going to do just a little test with the default setting of 4.1 by 3.8. Okay, it needs to be a little bit wider, so I'm going to 4.5 or 4.6. Needs to be wider. Let's just be brave and go to 6 millimeters. There we go. And now this foot is holding the cording in place. I just want to, let's just lift and separate just a little bit here. So I'm kind of holding my hands here like this. Keep them a little bit separated. That was our little practice stretch here, this 1.5 inches, but look at how cool that looks. And look how super thick that thread is, right? Okay, so look what I have here. I have a wing needle. Wing needles and stitch number 701 make a really cool thing called entre deux, or entre deux, whatever you want to call it. And the way this works is every time this wing needle, which has little wings on the side of it, this is a specialty needle, so every time this needle makes a penetration through the fabric, it's actually making a hole, and it's making a hole on purpose. When it makes the hole back and forth, it makes a pattern. And this entre deux is a trim that you can purchase when you do heirloom sewing and things like that. I've got some samples that I can show you, but it also makes for fun embellishment for quilting. Now, typically you make the entre deux like you would make trim, and then you sew it in again. It's like a separate strip of fabric, right? So I'm gonna lift up our foot, and I'm just gonna do this stitch in between these two, oopsie daisies. This has to go on top here. Okay, so I'm just gonna do this stitch in between these other two stitches here. And in this case, quite often you would also starch your fabric heavily. I have not done that right now. And I do have a full tutorial on this that I've included in your presentation deck. So let's go ahead and stitch this. So now you can see the little holes, the light shining through them like that. But yeah, that's what it's supposed to look like. And then let's go over to the drawing board.
And then this piece would be an insertion piece. So essentially, you would trim about an eighth to 1/4 of an inch away from each side, and you would stitch a piece on either side, stitching right in those previous holes. So here is kind of like a standard basic heirloom technique. We've got pin tucks. Remember, we learned to make those last time. This is the Spanish hem stitch attachment. So this creates a look of joining two pieces of fabric together with space in between. And then you see this little choo-choo track stitch that's right here and right here. This is my faux entre deux. And this was much thinner, so I used a 110 size regular needle and some skinny cording, but everything matches. So unlike our piece that we just created, where there's a lot of contrast on this, right, with that Kelly green cording and all of that stuff, this, everything was the same color to create the look of entre deux. Here's an example where I have it on a quilt. So this was a little strip here of just quilting cotton, and this was other quilting cotton on this side. But picture this like a little skinny border that's going in here, right? But this was done with some cording and a wing needle and the number 3 foot and that same stitch number 701, and that is the result, is those little choo-choo tracks that you see on this quilt. And sometimes if you have the right fabric, you don't even need the cording. So this is stitch number 701. This is linen that's been heavily starched, and that was the wing needle creating that entre deux type stitch on this linen. And then the wing needle with a asterisk stitch and a honeycomb. So you can see that, there's lots of different kinds of techniques. Now, the only thing that we added into this is I showed you how to use the 701 stitch kind of for the way it's intended, right? But we all know that we can play around with stitches and do things so differently. But that's kind of a little heirloomy technique there. So now for our fun little bonus project, we're going to make a thread catcher. What is a thread catcher? Well, it's something that can hold those weird little clippings that get in your fabric pieces, that get on your clothes or whatever, so that they don't wander off and live on your ironing board, right? So we're going to cut one 14-inch square of cotton fabric interfaced with fusible woven and stabilized with 2 layers of ultra clean and tear. Then we're going to take two 2-inch by 2-inch pieces for the zipper tabs. We're going to fuse those with fusible woven as well. Then for the back, you're going to need two 7.5-inch by 14-inch cotton fabric pieces for the lining. And there's a 9.5-inch square of any kind of batting that you're going to need. And ultimately, this is going to be a circle, but don't worry about that for right now. And then I'm using a sheet of applique fusion seal to adhere my batting to our thread catcher at the end. Now for our thread, well, it's selections from our Aurifil thread kit. I am doing our Botanic Earth colorway with this, so I'm using the thread colors from the Botanic Earth kit. And if you want, you could use 12 weight spaghetti. You could use whatever the case is, but I'm going to use couching yarn, which is faux fur from our loops and thread, and a worsted weight creamy yarn. I'm also adding a 24-inch length of zipper coils from Sally Tomato with one zipper head. And then with this project, I'm using the circular embroidery attachment. I'm using the open toe foot number 20C. I'm using a couching foot number 21 and a 4D zipper foot, which, by the way, comes with your Bernina 990. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to take those two pieces that are 7.5 by 14 inches, and you're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch down one of the long sides, but you're going to leave an opening so that you will be able to turn this inside out. And then what I like to do is take my little temporary glue stick, my Elmer's water-soluble glue stick, and join my opening so that it doesn't come apart easily. Even though I want to open this later, we're going to glue this shut so that when we use this with our circular embroidery attachment, it'll be an easy process. Okay, so I'm folding my creme de la creme fabric in half vertically and horizontally to find the center. I have interfaced the back of it with the fusible woven, and I'm using, in this case, I'm just using 1 layer of medium tearaway stabilizer. And then I've also marked where I want to start making my rings for this project. Now, this is in contrast to how we did this for our quilt, right? We used the notches on the circular embroidery attachment, we used seam guides or whatever, but I'm just marking these along the radius so that I know where to move it and start it. So I'm using this worsted weight yarn that is just like acrylic yarn or whatever, and then I'm using the faux fur yarn. I'm using 28 weight thread through my needle and a 40 weight thread that matches my background fabric, a 40 weight thread in the bobbin. And the 28 weight thread that I'm using is this pinky color and this camel color. I'm going to pair the camel thread with the worsted weight yarn, and then I'm going to do my decorative stitching with this pinky mauve color. So with the camel color thread threaded up through my needle and my creme de la creme background fabric marked, I'm going to place my center pointy thing right over my intersection again, just like you saw me do in the past. We're going to feed that on top there. And now because I have pre-marked my fabric, I'm just going to hover my foot over my drawn line there with the water soluble marking pen. And now I'm feeding my worsted weight thread through the foot, and I am taking advantage of the Bernina's altered stitch memory, which means that I can have my zigzag stitch set at the default setting, and then I can actually take my straight stitch and do that at a satin stitch. And so that's what I'm going to do. And I'm just toggling back and forth between stitch 2 and stitch 1 to create this, kind of very bohemian, botanic kind of look on this project. And I'm going to do this technique on our first ring and our third ring. But once my first ring is complete, I'm going to switch threads. And I'm going to use that faux fur thread, but I'm going to only use one of the skeins because this thread is twisted. It's a 3-ply, so I'm only using 1-ply. And I'm going to feed that through the foot with a straight stitch that's been slightly elongated. I think I have this at like 3 millimeters because you got to be careful that the little fuzz from the faux fur doesn't get stuck in the foot and everything. And then I stitched that around my second ring. Then I switched back to the worsted weight thread for the third ring. Once the couching was complete, I put on my number 20 seafoot and I changed my thread to my more pink color, and I just played around with mirror. I played around with some of my decorative stitches, and then I just filled in the gaps between the couching stitches. For the last ring around, I used cream color thread, and then I removed my work from the circular embroidery attachment and removed the circular embroidery attachment from my machine. And then I trimmed close to my stitching line at about 1/8 of an inch and turned my work through my little opening that I left and then pressed everything flat. Then you're going to take your circular embroidery attachment off and do all of that stuff. And we're going to use a skinny zigzag, just the default setting is fine, to sew the opening or turning opening closed. Now, this is something that we are never going to see, so don't get too worked up about this. We might even be able to skip this stitch, but this will help us press it so that everything is nice and flat. So I pinned this, and you can see there's our opening, and I have everything folded under on top of itself like that, and I'm just going to zigzag that opening closed. And then once that's closed, we've got like a little tortilla here. And now what we want to do is add the zipper. So I'm going to start with just taking my zipper and aligning my coil tape up on that seam line of the lining. And then I'm just marking off the width of the zipper. And then we're going to mark our top and bottom centers on our circular piece on the wrong side, like that. And then we're going to do the same with our zipper, marking the center of that. And now that we have that center marked, we're going to be able to pull these coils apart, and we're going to pin our zipper with the tape wrong side down onto the wrong side of our work. And we're going to stop pinning at the mark that we made right above the seam of the lining because we need to leave that part open. And notice at this point, I'm not using our zipper head because we just need to put the coils on at this point. And then once we pin this into place, we're going to take this over to our machine. where we're going to have our number 4D zipper foot inserted on the machine with a straight stitch. And the straight stitch needle position is going to be 3 notches to the right of the needle. Or, I'm sorry, 3 notches to the right of center. And we're going to start right on our marked spot. And so we're kind of going for the folded edge of our circular embroidered embellished piece to be right along the right edge of our zipper foot. And we want to sew this so that our zipper tape is flat as possible. Removing those pins before we get to them. And then we'll repeat the same process for the other side. So once that's done, we are going to need to attach our zipper head to our piece. And so I use a thing called that zipper thing for this. It's basically a zipper jig. This thing is holding the zipper head while we slide our zipper tape through. You just have to keep everything nice and straight and even as we pull it over that zipper head. And there we have it. And now it's not quite done yet because we have to add our little zipper tabs at the end so that things don't come apart when we unzip and rezip and unzip and all that good stuff. But before we do that, we need to add our batting. And so it's very scientific. So I have a very large piece of batting here that I'm using, and I'm going to use my water-soluble marking pen to trim. And then once I get that marked, I'm simply going to cut it with my scissors. And then I'm going to use a significant amount of one sheet of applique Fusion Seal. This is a washable, fusible web that does not need to be stitched down. So fusible, this Fusion Seal stuff is like what you would, iron a patch onto outdoor equipment, on a patch onto your golf club bag or whatever. Then once your piece that you've pressed is cool, you're going to peel the paper off and adhere it to the lining part of your bag. And this is what's going to catch the thread. And so now we're going to press our interfacing onto the back side of these 2-inch squares. And then we're going to take one of our zippers, and I like to work with it with the zipper right side up. And then this is where the zipper started. So I'm just giving this a little trim. And now we're going to put these pieces right sides together. And we're going to wrap the edges around the zipper. And then we're going to stitch about a 1/2 inch. And then once we stitch, we're going to turn it inside out. We're going to keep those little tabs folded over like so. And we're going to press and set those seams. And then we're going to fold this over a 1/2 inch. And then another 1/2 inch. Press and top stitch. And we're going to do the exact same with the other side. And then once we do the other side, we're going to admire our work and see if this is something, I have this so that it zips up, so it'll cover all of the oogie threads. But this is something that we can just have in our sewing room, ready to kind of sit on our ironing board to catch those threads, or we can take it with us to a retreat or whatever the case is.
All right, what do you think? Are you ready to take on lesson 5? Or are you just starting lesson 1? you know who you are, you know? Anyway, you know what? I am making 3, Amy's making 1, so we're going to have lots of expertise for you as we go through this project. And you know what? After today, there's 7 more. So I'll see you again in March. And don't forget to check out our Bernina of Naperville YouTube channel for other tutorials that, might assist you in this journey. It's easy to get to. It's youtube.com/Bernina of Naperville. And there you can like, comment, and subscribe. Happy embroidery, because that is what we're going to be doing next month. Cheers.
Each day I pray for evening just to be with you. Together at last at twilight time. Together.